Shalom and welcome to Questions and Answers with RabbiEricT. Today's question comes from Sam, and Sam asks, Rabbi Eric, I heard that the Torah was divided into, or the commandments in the Torah were divided into three categories: the sacrificial commandments, the ceremonial commandments, and the moral commandments. Is this true? Well, the answer to the question is no, it's not. The Torah commandments are divided into what are known as mitzvot, or laws, and then ordinances, and then judgments. Nowhere in the entire Bible are we taught that the Torah is divided into ceremonial or sacrificial or moral laws. As a matter of fact, when you look at an individual law, for instance, the commandments concerning the Sabbath involve moral issues, sacrificial issues, and ceremonial issues. So you really can't just divide them up into these laws are sacrificial, these laws are ceremonial, and these laws are moral. The reason that these distinctions were brought about was partly to do with separating the Jewishness or Judaism from our faith, because the sacrificial system and the ceremonial systems within the Torah commandments all have to do with what things are identifiably Jewish. And so among Christians who wanted to separate from Judaism, they decided that only the moral laws, or the thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not commit adultery laws, would be established or part of the church, where the other laws were part of Judaism. This is part of replacement theology, or the belief that when Yeshua died, he established a new covenant with a new group of people called the church, or the new Israel, because he had divorced himself from Jewishness and Judaism and now started a new faith with a new group of people, replacing Israel with a new Israel. Along with this belief comes this idea that there are three different categories of laws, and only the moral laws are incumbent upon this new Israel that we read. Not only is this unbiblical because the names are different, but it's unbiblical because, for instance, in Daniel's time, we see when we read in the book of Daniel that Daniel is away from Israel in Babylon. There is no temple standing because it's been destroyed. There are no priests active in the temple because the priesthood has been destroyed or killed off or moved off. Yet Daniel considers the ceremonial and sacrificial laws so important that he continues to pray 3 times a day while looking toward Jerusalem and longing to be in Jerusalem, where he can continue to fulfill these commandments. So Daniel does everything he can, not only the moral laws, but also the sacrificial and the ceremonial laws. He also, by the way, keeps kosher, as well as the 3 other Hebrews that are with him that we read about in the book of Daniel. So refusing to not keep the kosher laws, which again would not be considered moral laws, but sacrificial and ceremonial laws. Beyond that, Yeshua says in Matthew 5:17 that he didn't come to do away with the law or the prophets, the entirety of the Tanakh, but he came to fulfill it. But goes on to say, as long as heaven and earth was still here, that these laws would be established, and that not one jot or one tittle, not one of the tiniest little parts of these laws would be done away with, and that whoever breaks even the smallest of these laws would be considered least in the kingdom. Beyond Yeshua and beyond Daniel and what we read in the Tanakh, we also find that all of the apostles and all of the disciples continue to keep the ceremonial and sacrificial laws all the way through the destruction of the temple, even after the death of Messiah. So if the teaching is that with the death of Messiah and him fulfilling the sacrificial system and ceremonial system, all that's left is the moral system, it doesn't seem as if the disciples that followed Yeshua in those early days got the memo that these things were done, because Paul makes it important to be back in Jerusalem for the feast days, even at the risk of his own life at times, so that he can participate in the sacrificial and ceremonial laws. Not only that, we find Peter and John going to the temple at the hour of prayer, which was a time of sacrifice, and we find Paul making sacrifices in the temple under the instruction of James or Jacob, so that he can fulfill and prove that he did not stop obeying the Torah or the laws of Moses. So it's important for us to understand that these changes, or this idea of changes, is something that's brought about as part of replacement theology. It's part of separating the faith of those in Yeshua from those in traditional Judaism. It is heresy, it is errant teaching, and it drives people into a blindness to the fullness of what God has in His Word for us. I hope this answers your question. If it does, I hope that you'll share it with others. If you've enjoyed this video or it's been meaningful to you, please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you'll be notified of upcoming videos, and share this with others. If you have a question you'd like to have answered in an upcoming video, email me at RabbiEricT@britam.org. And thank you and shalom.